small generators, such as small businesses and individuals, residential, can actually, for the extra energy that they produce, either through wind or through solar on their roof, if they produce more than they're consuming, that can actually be stored on the grid for use at a later time. It actually just obviously doesn't get stored on the grid, it's used somewhere else, but then they can essentially get credit equal to a kilowatt hour that they produce and use that at a later time. So it's almost like banking what they produce, because oftentimes they might not be using their energy at the time they're producing it. Utility collaboration is key, involving utilities at the earliest point of development and getting their buy-in, and also ameliorating their concerns about the possibilities for revenue loss, that there will be no revenue loss, cost recovery will be included in the policies, and that will be lots of assistance in helping them integrate and meet their goals. That monetary incentives are also there to help deal with the additional upfront costs that are often seen when it comes to adding renewable energy. And that transmission is coordinated at the same time, since a lot of renewable energy resources are actually located far from load centers. So it's important to get that energy in those areas to the load centers, and like Texas is building this extremely large transmission line to get those resources there. But really one of the stumbling blocks is the finance, trying to finance those transmission lines. And so some sort of plan needs to be developed. And then there's the chicken and the egg issue of transmission builders may not want to build a line if they don't have if they don't already have a project being built. Nobody wants to build a project unless the line's already going in. So coordinating those two things at the same time often takes a lot of stakeholder meetings and that sort of thing to get this going. And a lot of states are actually looking at that, and Nebraska is looking at that right now as well. And adequate monitoring enforcement is also key. Predictable targets for industry are also critical. The RPS should provide a stable design for all parties in order to reduce regulatory risk and improve the opportunities for financing and investment. And renewable energy targets should be of sufficient duration and stability to minimize risk and accommodate long-term contracts. It's really providing a stable regulatory and policy environment, incentive environment, that any investor, including the utility, is ensured that they will have a long-term profitability. It doesn't have to be significant, but maybe a 5% return on investment, so they can make these calculations and make good business decisions. In addition, uncertainty about RPS programs can slow market development and limit investment. So an RPS should have a solid framework that all parties can rely on in order to reduce regulatory risk and improve opportunities for financing and investment. That also is key for bank financing, or getting finance from banks. And right now that's a very challenging issue, as you well know, I'm sure. So this year's trend with regards to renewable portfolio standards, 13 states have introduced legislation on renewable portfolio standards. And I think there's maybe 85 bills, but those are introduced within 13 different states. Increasing requirements has been on the minds of a number of them. They've found that their utilities have been able to, some states have found that their utilities are more easily able to meet their renewable portfolio requirements than they had once thought. Thus they have increased them. In fact, that was the case in Colorado. First they passed a voter initiative of 10%, and the utility just was able to increase their renewable energy significantly very quickly. So the legislature, in collaboration with the utility, agreed to double it to 20% by 2020. So increasing requirements is common. California just passed a bill out of the Senate to increase it to 33% by 2020. So 1/3 of all their energy will be required to be produced or to come from renewables by 2020. However, that's gone through the Senate. It still obviously has to get through the House and be signed by the governor. Adding new resources to the portfolio is also a popular point of revision within as states relook or reanalyze their RPSs and tweak them. Indiana and Florida are also considering creating a new RPS. So they would be added to those 28 states that already have an RPS. I want to focus a little bit specifically on wind, since that is really forming the brunt of, or the majority of RPS requirements are being met by wind, mainly because it is one of the least cost renewable energy sources. The other least cost sources are biomass, so biomass is significant. Biomass is essentially plant material that is burned, or it can be turned into fuel, obviously, to generate energy. So it could be wood or waste from farming, farm waste essentially, such as corn stover. So in 2008, new wind made up 42% of all new national power producing capacity. So that's fairly significant. The rest was mainly from natural gas. So wind is really, if you look at it on a national scale, it might be only about 2% of total energy generation. But if you look in the last year, it's significant. Nearly 50% of all new generation has come from wind. Now, Nebraska ranks 6th for wind potential, and that is, it has significant wind resources, so 6th in the nation for the amount of wind resources. However, it's 24th in the production of wind energy. And just to compare to Iowa, they rate 10th in the nation for wind potential, but are currently 2nd in production, producing 38 times more wind energy than Nebraska. So I think this is a interesting chart here. I don't know if you can parse it out, but as you'll see, this just essentially rates those states that are top in wind production. So you see Iowa, number 2. Texas is more than double Iowa. Then we have California, Minnesota, Washington, Oregon, on down the line there. And then if you look at the potential for wind ranking, that doesn't really correlate significantly with what their actual production is. You'll see states like Washington and Oregon, which were down in 24th, 23rd on the amount of wind capacity within the state, and they're still, 5th and 6th. And California 17, of course they're a large state, but they're still in Iowa being 10th for wind potential. So what is the commonality? What really drives this wind production? And I really think it's state policy just as much as it is the cost of electricity. And if we look at what is one of the main things that all these states have in common is a renewable portfolio standard, except for Kansas. But Kansas is 3rd for wind potential. So they have very good wind resources. And their electricity rates are also, they are relatively low. But if you have really strong resources, it obviously makes building wind turbines, it makes them more effective and produces more energy per turbine.
Which state has the top potential?
The top potential, was that even listed there?
Number 1 was on that chart.
It's North Dakota.
Wind production ranking, yeah, I think it's actually North Dakota or South Dakota.
North Dakota.
North Dakota, and I think South Dakota is up there as well. So North Dakota is also pretty far behind as well. And part of that is really, transmission lines, population density. Those play a huge role in how far are these wind resources from the load centers. In Minnesota, for example, they haven't had to build, they've had to build transmission, but it hasn't been over massive distances. So this I just wanted to show this chart indicating the average electricity prices in Iowa, which has had tremendous growth in wind relative to the rest of the United States. So you can see there's been dramatic growth in electricity prices. Some of that may be partially due to regulation, clean energy requirements. Deregulation actually has played a significant role, ramp up in natural gas prices. However, you'll see Iowa, which is actually predominantly coal. They're around 68% percent.